all of you. So we're going to run now this first session dedicated to carbon pricing, carbon market, carbon tax, and all the social acceptability also to discuss with this on the reform, on the new regulation that we have to drive in a new framework. Before running this first roundtable, we are going to share with you a message from Michael Green from Massachusetts in US, dedicated to his point of view from the other side of the Atlantic. So let's please have the message of Michael Green.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Green, and I am the executive director of an organization called Climate Exchange that's based in Boston, Massachusetts. It's focused on state and regional climate policy across the US, with a keen focus on carbon markets and the designing and development of carbon pricing strategies. Lots to report out here of what's happening in the US. We're certainly excitedly watching some of the things that are happening at the subnational level. For those of you who aren't familiar, Washington State on our Pacific West Coast just announced that they're going to be moving forward with a cap and trade market, very similar to what has been passed and has been functioning in California now for some time. Now, Washington State will actually be one of the largest carbon pricing strategies and schemes here in North America. We also have seen very recently the announcement of a regional policy called the Transportation Climate Initiative that develops a cap and trade model carbon market for transportation fuels in the Northeast. So on the other side of the country from the great work that's happening in Washington State. Both of these policies really show that the US is interested and committed to moving forward with this, at least at the state and regional level. We know as well that there's also some opportunity and a lot of focus with our new administration. Lots of excitement. You can see the smile on my face that we have a complete change of tone down in Washington, D.C. from the previous administration, which I'm sure frustrated many. The Biden team now has been very cautious with how they move forward with their climate plan. There's a lot of excitement about the infrastructure strategy that they announced earlier in the year. It'll be a $2 trillion investment into R&D, technology development, and infrastructure rollout across the US with a keen focus on renewable energy. And this is really going to bring down the costs and spur innovation here in the US, which is really exciting to see happen. Now, we realize, though, that all of the innovation and the investments that the federal government wants to make isn't going to be enough if we want to meet our net zero targets by 2050. And some of our US state or subnational policies even call for a net zero policy by 2040. So we're certainly going to be watching the federal government and seeing how they move forward with thinking about a carbon border tax adjustment or a carbon market here in the US at the federal level. We realize as well that a lot of policy is following the leadership that's already been set up by the private sector. So some of you may already be familiar with the LEAF coalition. The LEAF coalition, which was announced in the Climate Leadership Summit that was hosted on Earth Day here in the States by the Biden administration, pledged $1 billion into climate finance around forest preservation. And that's another great example where the private sector teaming up with government is really going to make a huge impact in how we think about not only carbon reduction strategies, but also forest management and development in our global tropic zones. Both this initiative as well as the new strategies at the US development entity known as USAID are going to be focusing their investments into different projects that not only help with global development, but help with global development in a low carbon, carbon neutral strategy. So there's a lot happening at the government level as well as within the private sector. Now, I do work for an entity, in full disclosure, called Carbon Capital Advisors, where I serve as a partner that's looking at investing into several of these carbon finance opportunities and carbon projects globally. One of the things that makes me really excited for why I'm working on these projects is the opportunity to be able to serve communities that previously we hadn't been able to reach through global aid, philanthropy, or carbon markets specifically. And that's, linchpinning off of the technologies of blockchain, as well as the new opportunities where communities that previously used to be way too impossible to reach out to now have access to the internet and have access to cell phones. And it's allowing us to create projects in places that previously weren't available, which is one thing that I'm really excited about. And the second piece that I'm really excited about that I hinted to is, of course, the new opportunities being brought about by technology. And looking at the new strategies around carbon accounting, how we can intertwine blockchain and different immutable ledger systems to guarantee not only that carbon is actually being saved, but also that over time, we're not seeing double counting or seeing projects that were maybe being stated that they're being retired, but actually are not. So there's lots of new ways that we can leverage new technology in order to make sure that we're actually creating real value to communities, but also real carbon savings. So those are just a few of the things that I am focused on. I would add as well that it's really important that we find ways to be collaborative. The US is coming back after a 4-year hiatus into climate leadership. I think our corporations have certainly been standing without the federal government over the last 4 years in this space. But it's really important for us to see policy opportunities and policy engagement coming to the forefront as part of the US initiative to addressing the global climate crisis. And one of the things that's been pivotal to the US political strategy to this point is engaging communities in the environmental justice sector. In a lot of the new strategies being designed by the current administration are actually being led by communities of color and by disenfranchised communities that have been previously left out of the conversation. That's what's going to make this host of solutions unique to what we've seen in the past, because that's really going to give it staying power. That's going to give it the community support and the community backing. That means no matter what future US administration is in charge, that communities are really going to continue to support and demand action. And that means that we're not going to see a change in the way the United States is leading in 4 years, but instead, a full national approach that is open to the world, that is going to be able to stand the test of time, as well as stand up to future administrations and really be something different. So we're happy to be back in fighting the climate crisis with you all, and really excited to be a part of this conference where we'll get to continue to talk about carbon pricing and the opportunities for an investment into a global transformation away from dirty fossil fuels. So with that, I turn it back to my panelists, and thank you so much for the time.
Michael, from Boston, to share your point of view, what you achieved in US, in States, and also we do believe that the new Biden-Harris administration is really coming back seriously in this framework, and carbon pricing is a part of the new policy for a real recovery plan. Hopefully that it will be a green plan not only from US, but also for different regions of the world. And I would like now to back to the very first roundtable, who's going to moderate by Dominique Vignon. Dominique is academician from the French Technology Academy, and he's going to run this first roundtable with Professor Chaozhou Qi from Wuhan University, and also with Richard Clark from Ortec Finance, based in UK. And all the two and the three panelists are a great piece, an expert on the carbon pricing, dedicated on this field, and now update the roadmap in 2021. So pleased to welcome now Dominique Vignon from French Technology Academy and Professor Chaozhou Qi from Wuhan University, and also Richard Clark. Hope you're here. Yes, I see you, Richard. Hi, Richard, and from UK. So, yes, Dominique, please, it's your turn, and I'll let you introduce the purpose.
Thank you very much, Fabrice. Thank you also to Isabelle for co-organizing and co-chairing this conference, and thank you for the invitation. So let me first introduce myself briefly. I'm an engineer and an economist by education, and I am a specialist in design, construction, operation of power plants, all types. And in the last about 10 years, I devoted much of my time to the carbon pricing issue and providing reports and analysis on this item. So before turning the floor to the two panelists, Richard Clark and Professor Qichaochu, I would like to share some background information with you. The start is really the title. As a reminder, what's the status of world CO2 emissions in the recent years? And what you can see here, which was already said, is that carbon emissions reduced slightly in Europe. They remained more or less even in the US. On the opposite, there has been a big surge in China and a regular surge in so-called other countries. And therefore, I think we all welcome the recent announcement of the Chinese president to try to stabilize these emissions, reduce them, and reach carbon neutrality by 2060, because these countries are and the US are the big issue. Here is the share of these emissions, where again you can see that countries under development plus China plus India, they account for more than 2/3 of the emissions worldwide. Now, what's the status of carbon markets? On this slide, you can see that there has been a lot of progress in recent years. In green are countries or regions where there is already a trading market, or there is a firm decision to implement a trading market. And there are more and more green countries. Blue countries are countries where there is taxation, which is effective. Now, what, and it will be the first issue, how can we embark the other countries or other regions to also put in place a carbon market and a trading system. First issue. Now, on this, it is not enough to see where there are carbon markets, but it's very important to dig in a little bit and discuss the price of CO2 on these different markets. And here there is an interesting figure provided by the French Treasury, where there is here in abscissa the share of domestic emissions subject to carbon pricing, and on the other side, the carbon pricing level in dollars per ton of CO2. And yes, indeed, there are markets, more and more markets where carbon is capped and traded. But for some of them, it is at a very low price and below $10 per ton. And it is a second issue. How are these countries going to evolve and reach higher levels where the emissions emissions would be more effectively cut? And let's take a look to recent changes. I guess most of you are familiar with the rapid rise of the EU emission trading system, which this is the curve as of today. So it is, as we speak, a little bit above $50 per 50 euros per ton, I mean, but it even jumped, rose nearly up to 56, 57 euros, starting from a past value those last years in the range of 20, 25 euros. So at this level, the system starts to become effective. Now, let's also share with you the very recent information coming from Germany. And in addition to the European system, Germany has extended its national emissions trading system, which covers all distributors of energy, which covers petroleum, oil, gas, etc. And it starts relatively slowly, but they plan to have it increasing year over year until more than 55 euros in year 2026. And there has been a recent forecast or analysis made by UK company, Cambridge Econometrics, which concludes that in case Europe is serious with its net zero objective, the carbon price should be in the range of 180 euros per ton in year 2030 and continuing to rise. This is consistent with what was developed by the French strategic organization, strategic and planning organization, which considers that a carbon price should be in the range of 2,050 euros per ton in year 2030 and continue to rise until the very high price of nearly 800 euros per ton in year 2050. So this, of course, opens two questions, and I will end here. leaving the floor to the other panelists. The first question is, how is it possible to harmonize? What I show is that we have carbon prices which are very different from country to country, very different from region to region, where more or less all share the objective of net zero, and therefore they should all have the same perspective for carbon pricing. So how is it possible to converge? And second, how is it possible to get it accepted? Because at the end of the day, somebody has to pay. And this somebody is the end user. And we, particularly in France, we know quite well what happened when the government increased the taxes on oil, gas, etc., up to 50 euros per ton. That is well below what would be necessary. It was the so-called yellow jacket demonstrators. So, to conclude, I see three major questions. How can we embark all countries of the world in this direction? How can we converge with a unified level of carbon price? And finally, how can we get it accepted by the population? This being said, thank you very much. And I give the floor to the other panelists, starting with Richard Clark. So Richard, you have the floor.
Vignon, thank you very much. And thank you to Fabrice and Isabel for organizing this. I have some slides, but I think I'm just going to talk through it briefly and mention that I was formerly the director of Predictability Limited, which was set up to investigate the question of extreme weather events and the amount that climate change was affecting that. And I'm now Senior Advisor for Climate in the Climate and ESG Solutions at Ortec Finance. And in that role, I have been responsible for translating the knowledge that predictability gained in insights into the number of disasters that are happening, which is partially to do with urbanization, but of course also climate change increasingly. And these are now embodied in products that Ortec Finance now puts in the climate space. My work has been thoroughly written up in this book called Predicting the Price of Carbon, How to Obtain Climate Change for Good. And with that in mind, I would just like to say a few things about what we have been doing in carbon pricing, a new way of looking at this, and in particular about how to make it equitable and fair. So Vignon has mentioned some of the participants in carbon pricing and of course some of the problems in carbon pricing at the moment. The real challenge of carbon pricing is to keep us on the Paris 1.5 degree pathway to avoid costly decarbonization, to help us make more rational decisions, but of course to avoid the climate catastrophe. So we see great success in many big carbon pricing schemes like the EU ETS. It's amazing that it's 50 euros a ton now. There are side effects. I read this morning that Spain is trying to curtail the windfall taxes of nuclear and hydro that of course have benefited as low carbon producers. And we see other carbon markets in China emerging. And of course, there is the social cost of carbon too, and taxation, as we have mentioned. So it is in the context of the social cost of carbon that I want to say a few words. What we are determined from our work in predictability is that it's possible to create a relationship between the cumulative cost of climate damage to economies from climate change and relate that to the cumulative carbon emissions. This is what we call our cumulative carbon price. And in the book, it's just a very simple equation, and it's about $11 a ton. So we know that that is not in itself going to move the dial. We need something more potent than that. Even on a one-year basis, it's only $21 a ton. So the problem we have is to translate the losses at a global scale and to understand how this is potentially going to affect economies, because the rate of climate losses in total globally is increasing faster than the global economy. And that was before the pandemic. So if that continues, we will see weak economies falling by the wayside. So this is in itself a tipping point and a challenge for the global community. But what is important, I think, is to understand that not all countries are in the same position. The United Kingdom, for example, was a very early industrialized country and has proportionately quite high cumulative emissions compared to countries that are still developing. The US and China and Russia, of course, have big cumulative emissions too. So the question is, how do we use that information to create an equitable carbon pricing? We discussed this with a colleague, Anthony Webster, in a Nature comment article in 2017. Insurance companies should collect a carbon levy. And two issues there came out very strongly. We have what we might call a carbon inheritance, but we also have, that is a GDP, that is all our economies, but we also have a carbon liability, which is the great cumulative load that we have put onto the global ecosystem. So the question is how to combine that knowledge with the global cumulative and country level carbon emissions. And it is looking possible that we can combine these two, or that is to say the carbon emissions and the wealth of nations, into the global carbon price. And in doing so, we find some very interesting results, which is that for a fuel like coal, we would expect the UK, Germany, and the United States to have over $100 per ton carbon pricing. In China, it would be something like $20, in India about $10, and for countries, many countries in Africa, just a few dollars. But for each country, the individual carbon pricing could be used not as a revenue, but as an advisory tool in asset management and also in investment. So this is like the social cost of carbon, where, for example, if a state wants to have a nuclear plant or another fossil plant, the social cost of carbon, which is once again revived under the Biden administration, is being used for that purpose. But it's quite a challenging tool to use, and we think that perhaps more simpler tools would be useful. And this is one of the big ideas that predictability has produced. And in doing so, we joined the World Bank's Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, the CPLC, and some of those ideas were featured in their output and welcomed as innovative ideas about how to carbon price individual countries and potentially sectors as well. So we now have a prototype tool that does this, and as I say, all this information, most of it anyway, is presented in my book, which is the Predicting the Price of Carbon. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your very interesting comments and innovative ideas, which maybe will be further discussed by Professor Qichao Chu. Professor, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. it's my great pleasure to join CPC and share some experiences and carbon pricing policy in China. It is well known that after the Paris Agreement, China take many new climate policies in order to realize its NDC target. Besides its the target of energy intensity and carbon intensity reduction policy, and this energy intensity and carbon intensity reduction target in terms of the whole national and the provincial and industry building, transport, as well as electricity power sectors. All of these is allocated by the central government in terms of its reduction target about the energy intensity and the carbon intensity. This is, I think, the first kind of policies that China government take after the Paris Agreement. And the second is that the central government launched energy standard for the industry sectors and product, and also the buildings and transport tools in terms of the energy standard. Besides these two kind of policies after the Paris Agreement, it is very significant is that China start to implement their carbon market policies. Since the November of 2011, China choose 7 provinces and major cities to be their ETS pilots, including Hubei province, where my university located in, and Guangdong province, and the other 5 major cities, including Beijing, Shanghai, Tianjin, Chongqing, and Shenzhen. The 7 ETS pilots start its emission trading since 2013 and 2014. Up to now, in fact, the 7 ETS pilots operate almost 10 years. So the ETS pilots include or covered about 20 sectors by the ETS pilots, and the investors participate in their ETS pilots. Not only their cover their enterprises. A lot of private investors and institute investors participate in their ETS pilots, the 7 ETS pilots, and which covered almost 1 billion tons CO2. Among in terms of the 7 ETS pilots, and the carbon price is between 30 to 50 RMB during the past years, and based on our assessment about the 7 ETS pilots in terms of its emission effectiveness and the whole carbon market efficiencies. In terms of the energy intensity and the carbon intensity and the CO2 emission reduction, all these 3 targets, based on our assessment, the ETS pilots help the local province or cities reduce the energy intensity and the carbon intensity, as well as our carbon emission reduction very significantly. And also, the ETS patterns help the province and the cities which operate the carbon market in terms of the technology, low carbon technology innovation, and carbon finance innovation. It's also very significant. For example, many different the 7 ETS patterns they try to test different carbon finance innovations, including carbon option, future bonds, fundings, trust, and so on, and mortgages from the bank loan, and so on. So I think the ETS patterns during the past almost 10 years, it's achieved a lot of achievement, and very important is that the local officials and the local enterprises, and as well as the private investors, they understand the carbon pricing more and more compared with the other local regions without the ETS patterns. And also the basic ability buildings in terms of the carbon market among the 7 ETS patterns is much stronger than the other provinces and cities without the ETS patterns, I think. So that's why, based on the almost 10 years ETS patterns, the whole national carbon market start since 2017, and will formally start its trading in the 22nd of this month. That means after 20 days later, China's national carbon market will start its trading officially, formally. I think this is a very big, things in terms of the carbon market, even not only in China, it's also in the global, because as the former two speakers mentioned, China's, the emission, CO2 emission is the first one, the biggest one in the world. And if China can use their carbon pricing policy tools successfully to control the CO2 emission and reduction, I think which will set a very good examples for the other countries, especially the other developing big CO2 emitters countries can adopt their carbon pricing policy tools, which will give a lot of experiences. And it can show that not only the developed countries such as European Union and the United States can use carbon pricing policy, it's also in the developing countries can also use the carbon market or carbon pricing policies successfully. I think this is very significant for the global deal with the climate change, and also contribute to the agreement Paris, especially the 6 provinces, which is about the market mechanisms, how to develop and try to use the market mechanisms in all countries based on the Paris Agreement. In terms of the carbon accounting, China carbon market, both the ETS patterns and the national carbon market, because we cover the companies and accounting the carbon emission quantities not based on the product level, we based on the company level. So our carbon accounting, of course, include double counting, because our carbon market, not only the ETS pairs, but also the national carbon market covered direct and indirect emissions. That means not only the fossil fuel emission and production emission, it also covers the companies which use the electricity, which is indirect emissions. We hope we can control and try to push all the industries and the sectors, no matter you are the direct emission or indirect emission. We try to control and cover that in our carbon market. And I think this is a very stronger carbon market policy in China, because it's cover the direct and indirect and including the double counting. That's my want to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. It's always very interesting to listen to reports about your very important country, which will have a leading role in this endeavor. As we have a couple of minutes left, maybe I would like both of you to provide your final comments and maybe focusing on what should be done urgently and not left to a long-term future, or differently said, what do you expect from the COP26 conference in Glasgow, and how do you think it could improve the acceptance of carbon pricing? Richard?
Well, Vignon, yes, indeed. The COP26 conference is looming large on the horizon now, and I hear talk that one of the big goals that they hope to achieve is to get a global agreement on no more coal investment and no more coal-fired power stations, because in the electricity sector, that is the biggest contributor to carbon emissions, and there are so many alternatives now. Of course, people talk about natural gas, but in my view, that needs to go to hydrogen solutions. But renewable energy, the price there has come down so much that it's impossible to ignore that option. But what I think is necessary is, although the options are available, it is now time to give investors and markets the signals and the push and the regulations, whatever the actual carbon pricing mechanism is, to say that is the way to go, and this is the cost of not going in that direction, so that it's very clear that we are able to go in the right direction towards more renewable electricity, but of course renewable primary products that we've mentioned before, like steel as well. So that's my hope for COP26.
Thank you very much. Professor Qichao Chu, would you like to make some concluding remarks along the lines I introduced?
Okay, thank you. Yes, in terms of the 2016, I think with the China national carbon market start after 20 days later, we hope the carbon price can increase stably, and the national carbon market can cover more and more sectors, and the carbon price can increase reasonably, and then based on the reasonable carbon price, which can push the fossil users decrease its fossil energies, and try to use the renewable and cleaner energies, which can help to improve energy structures. I think this is the carbon price will play a very, very important role, which can balance the related price between the fossil energies and the renewable energies. If the carbon price is higher enough, which can increase the price of the fossil energy, and the competitive advantage of the renewable energy will be accepted by more and more enterprises and the whole societies, which can improve our energy structures. And also, the private investors will actively participate into the carbon market, which will help the carbon market liquidity, and finally help to form the reasonable carbon price. This is a very important thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. I think we are getting to the end of this session. Since we are still at the beginning of this conference, it's hard to draw any conclusion. The conclusion will build up progressively through the next sessions, and therefore I will leave it here and give the floor back to Fabrice.
Thanks a lot, Dominique Vignon, for having moderating this first session series dedicated to carbon pricing and carbon markets, sharing the point of view of a China perspective and also a UK perspective, and broadly that you have set the scene, Dominique Vignon, dear Dominique Vignon, on the work and the task that probably all Academy of Technologies, all Academy of Science could take their part to help the society at all, and indeed the civil society, better understanding this. And before going in the next panel, that I would like also to thanks a lot all our sponsors who are there. So I'll let you also see all the people and the organization who support this specific conference with platinum level, silver level, and indeed on the bronze level, and all the partners who make this conference happen.